So Jared is building a system that could scale in once in a while, but the initial signal is a different signal. So I take it in Bloodhound, you're using one logic template, which is the initial signal, and then you have a secondary logic template, which is scale in signals there. Yeah, so can you differentiate the two? Um, no. So yeah, I guess my default answer should be no. Um, that's actually not directly built into BlackBird. But let's see here. I've been asked this question before here. I'm trying to think of the workaround for that. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So let's add two different entry signals here. And I'll just use Bloodhound as an example. So, all right. So first thing you need to do is load in your Bloodhound template file there, clicking on the little ellipses button, right? And here's the open window. And let's see. So yesterday's workshop only had one logic template. Let's open this one here and see what we get. Yeah, that only has one logic template as well. All right, so let's try another one. All right, there you go. So from December 11th, there we have a logic template with a bunch of different signals there. So I'll just pick one at random to say, okay, so the what is that? Double bottom and higher low, double top and lower high. All right, so the first one on top, that'll be the initial entry signal there. And then we'll go in and add another Bloodhound signal there. This time we don't have to click the ellipses button. I'm just going to click the down triangle, and then we can see right there's the two Bloodhound files that were already loaded in. So just kind of remembered that. So now I can just click on the same Bloodhound file there, right? December 11th. So December 11th. And then from the pull down menu, I'll pick this one, the double bottom and higher low after 5 bars. Yeah, so there we go. It's kind of like the same signals, I guess, here, but one says after 5 bars. So that'll be the secondary scaling signals there. All right, so there's our two different signals. So then over on the order sets here, the way that you can constrain an order set to a specific signal here is we open up the entry order and we're going to go to the place option. So this adds a very simple secondary prerequisite. Yeah, would be the proper, I think the better term here. So, so BlackBird will only place this entry order after this prerequisite is has become true. And so our prerequisite is we're going to look at the Bloodhound signals here. All right. So essentially, this is almost the same menu as the trade signal sources there. Just kind of simplified here. So first thing we'll need to do is select our Bloodhound file there, or Bloodhound template. So there's December 11th there, and select the logic template. So again, this is our initial entry signal here from this logic template. And then, and of course, the signal obviously is going to be in the same direction. Right. So basically, this entry order is only placed when this Bloodhound signal occurs. Right. So we've just kind of locked this, this order set or this entry order to that signal there. Right. So now we can do the same over here. So let's see, this time I'm actually just going to make a copy of A, there. And so when I make a copy, that saves me a few seconds here because you can see the place already has the Bloodhound signal trigger already loaded in for me. So it just kind of saved me having to do that again there. And now this time, right, since this is going to be the scale-in order, we can then select the other signal source, right, or the other logic template that provides that secondary scale-in signal. And there we go. So now, right, so order set B, that entry order is only goes in with that signal. So now the issue is the reason why this is called a workaround and it's not directly supported is when Bloodhound gets a signal. So Bloodhound doesn't know which one's the initial signal. Again, that is all covered. That is all covered on the trade signal page. Yeah, so that's all discussed, on here. That's why it's a good idea to read this so you kind of have, so you'll understand the fuller picture of what's going on here with the trade signals. So for now, I'll just say that Bloodhound doesn't know which one is the initial signal and which one's the secondary signal. To Bloodhound, these are all just entry signals. Take them all. So when the secondary signal, when it fires off, Bloodhounds wants to submit both entry orders. Because again, remember, Bloodhound doesn't know the difference there. That's why this is called a workaround. So yeah, we need further additional menu systems here to be able to label one trade signal as the initial and label other trade signals as scale-ins there. But for now, this is what we have here. So let's see here. So all right, so let's say your secondary signal goes in first, right? Then BlackBird says, okay, I have a trade signal, and it's going to submit this entry order, right? And this entry order becomes pending. This is a pending entry order. So Bloodhound's waiting for, let's open this up. So again, Bloodhound's trying to submit every order set here, but this entry order has a place prerequisite. So Bloodhound's just waiting for this trade signal to come in so that it can then submit this entry order. So it goes into a pending state. All right. So over here, BlackBird, right? So in the info panel, BlackBird logically thinks it's in a trade waiting for this prerequisite to become true, and then it can fulfill that trade, right? It can fulfill, this trade signal that came in. So to get BlackBird out of that pending state to try and submit, right, the initial order, right, because the secondary signal came in first, right? Then what we need to do is set up the cancel option here. So we need to tell BlackBird, hey, cancel this pending order here after some time there. So so I think usually what you can do is say, okay, cancel that after 1 bar, or maybe even better yet, let's cancel it after a couple of seconds. Just cancel it after, I don't know, something like 2 seconds. There. All right. Yeah, you don't want to cancel this too quickly there, in case, all right, because if the initial signal comes in first, BlackBird's going to submit this order there, and you don't want to cancel too early because sometimes some brokers we have noticed really sometimes have a long delay period, and it really messes up the communication with NinjaTrader if your broker has a long delay, and it takes more than 2 seconds for your broker to communicate back to NinjaTrader and say, oh, okay, your order's filled. And then NinjaTrader communicates back to BlackBird and tells BlackBird your order's filled. So, yeah, so a little technical note on some of these, well, longer communication times with some of the brokers out there. So a little tip there, I wouldn't set it at 1 second. I mean, the vast 99.99% of the time that'll work, but it's that, tenth of a percent where you might run into an issue, so you can set it to 2 or 3 there, something like that. But hey guys, not to get off track too far, right? Again, the point is the reason why this is called a workaround is because you do have to set up this cancel to cancel this initial entry order when this secondary order came in here, right? And so once again, what if this secondary trade signal came in first, right? And it sounds like, the way you phrase the question, trade should only occur when the initial signal comes in first, and then a secondary signal can follow up after the initial, but you can't have a secondary signal coming in first. Well, so then that also means we need to go into our secondary signal and create some cancel orders to manage that as well. So let's see here. So one of the cancels here would be, let's see, what can we use? All right, I'm going to go to the advanced tab now. There. And when we're on the advanced tab, we can add all of these different triggers here. So we're not going to use this interval anymore. Instead, so normally I would go with this order status changed here. But I can't use the order status changed until I actually have, actually, no, maybe this will work. Actually, yeah, I think this might work here. So yeah, we might be able to just monitor and make sure that the entry order for A is filled. And that way we know, oh, okay, yep. So the initial signal went in first, and then our secondary signal is coming in afterwards, right? Normally, instead of monitoring the entry signal, usually, right, you'll have a stop loss or a profit target there. So let's see here. Let's just put in let's just put in a 3 ATR stop loss there. And so normally for this secondary scale in, what I'll usually do is in the cancel, let's see. Oh, wait, sorry. No, hold on. Oh. Oh, hold on. I put that in the cancel, sorry. I meant to put that in the place. Sorry. So the placement prerequisite, right, needs to make sure that order set A went in first. So there. So I'm going to switch over to the advanced tab, right? So we already have the bloodhound signal, which ties this entry order, right, to our secondary signal there. And now we're also going to add that order status changed option there. And so for here, normally what I'll do is select the stop loss there. And let's see here. Yeah, just make sure that that stop loss was placed, right? So if I know that this stop loss was placed, then I know that order set A went in first, and this is going in afterwards, right? So, yeah. Or again, we could go back to just checking to see, all right, that the entry order, was it already placed, right? So this is a market order, right? So whether you're checking to see if it's been placed or filled, right, kind of depends on your order type. Obviously, if it's a limit entry order, maybe it wasn't filled yet, right? So there's a lot of detailed information you're going to ask yourself there, you know. So if it's a limit entry order, maybe just saying, okay, let's just make sure it was placed. It may not be filled, but at least it was submitted first. It was placed, it was placed already, meaning it was submitted there first. So again, so you have to kind of work out the details there of how your system's working out, right? But the point is here, taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture is for the scaling order, right? We want to make sure that, that the signal for the scaling order was received, and then also make sure that some order of order set A, make sure that the initial order, one of these orders, was submitted or filled, placed first, essentially there, right? And then the mode, right? So what's the mode here? We're going to change this to in sequence, right? So right now it says simultaneously. So clearly you're not going to get a market order placed and, right, your bloodhound signal for that scaling order simultaneously here. So we're going to switch the mode to in sequence. And now I need to adjust the order here, right? So what's the order? So the order is that the entry order was placed, and then that secondary signal will come in, right? Or, instead of the order status changed, instead of that, we could add another bloodhound signal. There we go. So I could set this up so that, right, so we're looking for the initial signal to come in first. And so I do need to change the order there. There we go. All right, so this first, the top bloodhound signal there, right, that's our initial signal. And then the secondary, the bottom bloodhound signal, that's the scale in, right? So you can check to make sure that those come in sequence there as well, right? But then also getting back to the cancel, right? You don't want this secondary scaling order to be left open in a pending state forever, because BlackBird will leave it in a pending state forever, right? BlackBird doesn't decide when it should start canceling orders, right? You have to tell BlackBird when to start canceling orders there. So you will have to figure out, okay, how long can this order remain pending here before I need to cancel it and just kind of bail on that secondary signal there, right? So, you could say, all right, if X number of bars go by, maybe you kind of have an idea of how many bars, what's the maximum number of bars that it takes to get from the initial signal to a possible follow-up scale-in signal, and let's say no more than 15, if no more than 15 signals go by, then you could just put in something like that. But you have to figure out something about your system where you know that, all right, too much time has passed and there's not going to be a scale in signal there, right? Or again, there's always an or. Instead of an interval, I think what I hear a lot in these workshops here is when people are scaling in, they're checking to see, did this stop loss get filled? If this stop loss got filled, then the entire trade's done with. Yeah, so if that stop loss gets hit, then don't scale in here. So there we go. So we can check to see if the stop loss, right, for the initial order, check to see if it was filled or canceled. Actually, yeah, let's do filled there. And then also, let's say if you have a profit target as well. So let's put in a profit target there. So let's go back to our scale in entry order. Let's go back to the cancel there. All right. So yeah, so maybe if either the target gets filled, then we don't scale in, or if the stop loss gets hit, right, don't scale in. And so we can add another order status changed there, and we can check to see, okay, if the profit target for A, if it was filled, then cancel this scaling order there. And again, always remember to check the mode there. It's so easy to overlook that. Even I have done that many times myself in these workshops. I just overlook it, you know. And so for the mode, this would be any, right? Any, because we don't know if the profit target's going to get hit or if the stop loss is going to get hit, right? So if any of these become true, then cancel this secondary scale-in order. Right? So figuring out, exactly what conditions, you need to tell BlackBird to, to cancel this scale-in order there, right? That's the key there. There. So to boil it all down, it's just a matter of setting up the prerequisites for a scaling order, and setting up your cancel correctly so that pending order isn't left open forever. Right. Yeah. So there you go, Jared. That's basically it. Yeah, that's basically the broader overview of how you need to set up the place in the cancel so that you can control which order set is tied to which entry signal there, or trade signal there, and making sure that you have the cancels set up correctly as well, so that none of these orders are left open in a pending state forever. So also one note here. Let's go back to the initial order set here. And now the cancel here is not closing out the trade. It's canceling. That's why it says cancel, not flatten. So when, yeah, we're very specific on our terminology. So flatten has a very specific meaning, right? Meaning you're closing out the trade. So this is cancel. So this is canceling this order here. So market orders, obviously once it's been submitted, you can't cancel it, right? It gets filled instantly. So the cancel here, something else we could do, something else I just kind of thought of. Instead of the interval there, actually what we could do instead of that is we can add the bloodhound signal there. And I'll delete that interval there and go into the Bloodhound signal. And again, I'm on the Advanced tab here to gain access to all the different triggers, right? All these condition finders. So that's all a trigger is. A trigger is a condition finder, right? So it triggers when whatever condition it's looking for occurs, right? Then it triggers. So for this trigger, we could, for our initial entry order here, we could just say, there we go, is, all right, if the, sorry, wrong one. There we go. So if our secondary signal occurs, then we know to cancel this order, right? So if the secondary trade signal comes in first, all right, BlackBird will look at the first entry order and it'll evaluate the place, right? It evaluates that placement and says, no, I don't have a signal yet from this logic template. And then it's going to evaluate the cancel. Actually, I think it evaluates the cancel first. That would be the safer thing to do, right? So it's going to evaluate the cancel first and say, oh, you know what? I do have a signal from, I do have this secondary scaling signal here. All right, let's cancel this entry order. Boom, it's canceled. So that order doesn't go in. And then BlackBird's, going to move down the line there and look at our scaling order. And then it's going to see, well, all right, that stop loss hasn't been filled. And that profit target has not been filled. And let's see here. So we do need, yeah, actually, you know what? We do need another condition here as well. Yeah. So since I'm using market entries, I have a very easy answer here, which is I can just use the interval here and I can just say, all right, you know what, after 2 seconds, let's just cancel this order here after 2 seconds. Cancel it. So, all right. Yeah, because otherwise, if the placement prerequisite is true, all right, so the prerequisite here says, all right, look for this bloodhound signal. Yep. So the initial bloodhound signal did not come in first, so this didn't happen yet. And then, yeah, so this didn't happen in sequence. So BlackBird's not going to place this secondary scale in there because our bloodhound signals did not happen in sequence there. And so then the cancel here, right? Eventually that 2-second timer is going to hit, and then BlackBird will cancel this entry order, right? Also, you kind of figured out that why this is called a workaround, right? Because if your secondary signal comes in first, your orders are going to go into a pending state for a little bit of time there. Whereas if we actually had a properly built out menu system to be able to select, okay, this is the initial, this is a secondary scaling order, and maybe you have a third scaling order, to set all that stuff up, then the back end will handle everything correctly instead of putting orders in a pending state and then canceling them afterwards, right? Yeah, so just be mindful that when you are using a workaround, there's always that slight chance that things can go awry. So, all right. Yeah, so there we go. So adding in this third trigger here, there you go. Now we've built out as best we can we built out a system here that has checks and balances, right? So we have the checks, making sure that the placement conditions are in order, in the correct order, and then we have the balances, which will cancel the order when things are in the wrong state. There we go. All right, so I think that takes care of it. And there we go. Jared said yes. He kept running into the pending order state. Good. I guess it's good that you've already had experience with that. So yeah, so now you know exactly what I'm talking about the issues with the pending state, and why this is called a workaround. Because yeah, if again, repeating myself, but if we had uh, a proper menu system here, you know, for a dedicated entry signal and dedicated scaling signals, then there would be no pending state, right? But that requires a complete redesign, or not a complete, but um, it does require a fairly hefty redesign of the order sets menu, and it requires another dedicated management menu as well to address that type of or to provide more granular control over scaling orders, versus the initial entry order. So that is a hefty reworking of the BlackBird menu there to get that done. So I guess I should also point out here, back in the documentation here. Yeah, so I mentioned obviously understanding how the entry signals versus exit signals work and everything, and can one reverse a trade, things of that nature. Well, then there's also the triggers, right? So the triggers all belong in the order sets here. So if we go to the order sets there, and let's see, yeah, it is, there we go. So let's see, where were we? Halfway down. All right, so halfway down is the trigger conditions there. All right, so yeah, so we kind of covered the bloodhound signals as one of the triggers there. So there's the documentation on how all that works. Really, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. The one thing that might need, you might want to look at is the signal trigger mode. So, what does signal in the same direction mean? What does signal in opposite direction mean? Right? Signal in neither direction, signal in both direction, right? So clarifying, which one of these modes, should you be using, right? When you're trying to monitor a bloodhound signal there. And then here's the interval. So we covered that, right? Counting bars, counting seconds to cancel an order or something like that, right? So anyway, so here's all the different triggers. So we have an indicator value. For those who are familiar with Bloodhound, this one is very similar to the threshold solver, right? It's looking for an indicator value to reach some, some amount there, right? So you can see it's like the threshold solver, right? So we have a long threshold and a short threshold, just like the threshold solver there. And all right, yeah, so we kind of covered the order status change, right? We can check to see whether an entry order, profit target, or stop loss, whether it's been placed, filled, or canceled, right? Checking the status of an order. Then we have price versus indicator. So again, comparing it to Bloodhound, this is very similar to the comparison solver, right? Is one above or below the other? And then of course, profit targets or profit or loss, right? Quite often you'll adjust your stop losses, maybe moving to a break even based on a profit or loss, or something else of that nature. And then we also yeah, looked at the trade. Oh, no, actually, we didn't cover trade signal triggers. Yeah, this is another one specifically for scaling in there. So, yeah, this doesn't apply to Jared's case because he's using a dedicated trade signal for scaling in, right? This is for when you only have one signal source. So if you only have one signal source, but it might generate multiple signals in a row, and you want to scale in on all those additional signals, that's what this is for here. So there. All right. Yeah, so those are all the different triggers there. So you definitely, at the very least, just read the summary so you know what your options are, right? So you have an idea of what each one of these do just by reading the summary. And then if you think then if you're building something, you're like, oh, I remember there was a trigger that did this. Then you can go back to it and read up on the details later on once you're actually starting to use it there. So remember, there we go. These are the triggers, trigger conditions. And those are all components of the order sets section, right? The order set section here.